first thank everyone for coming on. I love teaching this class. It's something very important to me. It's something I so enjoy doing. And this class, in honor of my father, is especially important to me, and I'm so grateful to all of you for finding the time to joining me. And in dedicating this class to my father, I'm thinking about one of his many great strengths, and that is he was a person raised in what became Auschwitz, and he, within his heart and soul, always knew the importance of Jews standing up with Hadar, with Jewish pride, to defend themselves. And I think he learned that from growing up where he did in the 30s, where as a Jewish child, he and his friends were attacked. But I'd like to begin by showing a video that you've seen just to set the moment as we're prepared to talk about, in Abba's memory, countering anti-Semitism, a Torah perspective, and spending some time critiquing the national anti-Semitism strategy to counter anti-Semitism. So let's give a look at a video. This was composed. It was composed as we were driving to Pittsburgh, and we wanted to express solidarity and condolences as 11 Jews were murdered praying in my dear friend now, Rabbi Jeffrey Meyer's synagogue called the Tree of Life. Many thanks to the Fruchter family for the melody and the singing and the background, and to Avi Bloom for the beautiful montage photos in the background. This is for you, Abba, because you were my first teacher of spiritual activism. Throughout the centuries, too many have attempted to destroy Am Yisrael by attacking our covenantal pillars. And so we open by briefly putting out there the three fundamental pillars that together make up the Jewish nation. Judaism is not just a people, it's not just a religion. The Torah talks about Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. The first covenant, which appears in Genesis 15, is called the Brit Bein Haptarim, the covenant of the pieces. That covenant was established by God with the family of Israel, from which our people emerged. In particular, God is speaking to Abraham, who is the forefather of the covenant, and ultimately to Sarah, because the covenantal continuity comes through Isaac, her son, not Hagar's son, speaking to Sarah and Abraham, the forefather and foremother of Yahdut, from whom the children of Israel is born. Genesis 1, therefore, is the covenant that presents the seeds from which the Jewish family, the Jewish people, will emerge. The book of Exodus, chapter 19, chapter 24, presents the second covenant, also necessary. It can be called the Brit Sinai. It was presented to the Jewish people as we were becoming a nation. And at Sinai, our Torah was given, our faith, our ideology, much like the American Constitution that was drafted, the Bill of Rights, as America was becoming a nation. And what is our mission? What is the Torah all about? And out there openly understanding that people can understand Torah and the mission differently. There may be some basics, but it could branch off in different ways. But our mission is, as the Torah says, to become a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a priestly kingdom rulership, and a holy nation whose goal it is, whose mission it is, to bring ethical monotheism into the world. V'shamru derech Hashem lasot tzedakah u'mishpat. That's it. All of the Torah, interpersonal ethics, the ritual, Shabbat, kashrut, mikvah, prayer, all of it is under the general rubric of that mission, V'shamru derech Hashem, to bring God's ways, ethical monotheism, this partnership between God and humans to bring a system of ethics into the world. So Genesis is the covenant of our people. Exodus is the covenant of our ideology, what we stand for, our constitution. The book of Deuteronomy presents a third covenantal pillar, given right before entry into Israel. We're told about how we will be standing at the mountain of Gerizim and the mountain of Eval, and the covenant is given that we will enter into the land of Israel and live and stake out our claim in the land of Israel. So in essence, the nation of Israel, Am Yisrael, is made up of a people, a Torah or an ideology, system of laws that you need, and the land, much like America. America is made up of people, citizenry, and with the whole debate, who can come in, who shouldn't come in, people. Then there is the law, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, state law, city law, all of that. And then there is the land. Land is important to America, to the nation of America, as it is important to the nation of Israel. The very term Am, which means nation, could be vocalized im, ayin mem. Im means with, because the nation is comprised of these three covenantal pillars. It's what Rav Kook said. It's Am Yisrael, al pi Torat Yisrael, be'eretz Yisrael. People, Torah, and land. So much for our introductory comment. And what I'd like to posit, what I'd like to argue, that anti-Semites have risen against each of these pillars throughout history. In fact, anti-Semitism can be defined as attacking one of these three covenantal pillars. In other words, one could look at anti-Semitism and get lost in words and understanding precisely what it is. But a humble suggestion that the Torah puts it out there and stakes three covenants, and anti-Semitism, I think, could fit more or less into attacks into one of these three domains. Let's take them step by step. People anti-Semitism. That's when the enemy attacks a Jew for one reason, only because she or he is a Jew, no other reason. That's what Amalek, the biblical Amalek, is all about. Asher karcha baderech, vayizanev b'cha kol hanechashalim acharecha. For no reason, Amalek attacks. God says, Zochor lo tishkach. That's just the way it is. And in more contemporary times, it's 80 years after the Shoah. That's what the Third Reich was all about. I try not to mention the name of the leader of the Third Reich. What was his goal? What was Mein Kampf about? Murdering Jews because they were Jews, even Jews who said we no longer want to be identified as Jews. We'll convert to becoming Germans. And there were Jews in the early 30s, many Jews who supported him, many. And later on, who knows? It wouldn't help. If you were a Jew, if you were part of the people, that was it. For that very reason, when Israel was established in the Chok HaShvut, the law of return was put into place. The question is, if any Jew can identify, or who's identified as a Jew can claim immediate citizenship here in the land of Israel, how do we identify Jewish? And the identification was not a halachic identification. It was the Nuremberg identification. If it was enough to be murdered by the Third Reich, that's enough with which one can declare citizenship. So throughout history, there has been people anti-Semitism. And let's look at the second pillar, the Torah, or faith, or ideological anti-Semitism. My sense is that the best example of this faith ideology anti-Semitism was in fact Christianity. During the Crusades and after the Middle Ages, unfortunately, Christian anti-Semitism was alive and well. Roel Hilberg, who I believe was Christian, wrote The Magnificent Destruction of European Jews, talks about that anti-Semitism as 1,500 years of anti-Semitic activities. He actually has a famous chart where on one side he puts out there Nazi steps of anti-Semitism, and on the other side, he shows an equivalency with Christian anti-Semitism. Now, of course, thank God, especially in America that has changed. In parts of Europe, it's still alive and well. But what was that anti-Semitism? It wasn't that the Crusaders wanted to murder Jews because they were Jews. No, they claimed they didn't wish to murder Jews. All we had to do as Jews was to embrace their man God, to embrace the fundamental tenet of Christianity, of belief in Jesus. In the end, however, their goal of destroying our basic beliefs was the equivalent of destroying the Jewish people. In other words, for them, there was a mask to the anti-Semitism of attacking Jews as Jews. The mask was, we're really not anti-Jewish. We're anti the Jewish basic belief. Come over to our side and you will be safe. In a certain sense, that's what attacks on synagogues are all about. It kind of is a conflating when that murderer went into the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh or in Poway or in that Stiebel, Hasidic Stiebel in Muncie and tried to get into the school in Jersey City and then went into the grocery store. Yes, they were out to get Jews, but they in particular were attacking places of worship, places where we express our faith commitment. So that anti-Semitism has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Today, there's another type of Jew hatred that has emerged, And it speaks to the third pillar, and that is a covenantal promise that we would settle in the land of Israel. It's a different type of anti-Semitism, but it's anti-Semitism no less. It is what can be called anti-Zionism. Post the Holocaust, certainly when I was growing up, it was not the politically correct thing to attack Jews directly. After all, we had just lost 6 million Jews. And as time moves on, we're further away from the Holocaust. It becomes for the general world a footnote. Instead of attacking Jews, Israel is attacked. But in the end, the two, most of the time, are the same. Anti-Zionism is a mask, a front for anti-Semitism. People out there don't want to say we're anti-Jewish. No. We're just anti-Zionist. And this is where the strategy of the United States, the national anti-Semitism strategy to counter anti-Semitism fails. If one looks through these 60 pages, which I've studied, read, and reread over and over, and its brief summary of 15 pages, which most people will read, not once is the word Zionism mentioned. Now, one has to be very clear and nuanced when speaking about these issues. I recognize and accept that there are anti-Zionists who are not anti-Semites. There is criticism of Israel that I believe is legitimate, and a democracy would want a healthy debate in the public marketplace of ideas. And so it's okay to criticize, whatever your opinion, Israel's plans for judicial reform. Yes, although I'm living now in Efrat, we're staying in our children's home. Efrat is beyond the green lines in Gush Etzion. People could have different opinions about settlements. People can have different opinions about the future of Judea and Samaria. That's all legitimate. But there is a basic anti-Zionism that is anti-Semitic. And what I'd like to do is offer my dear friends, one of the greats of our time, greats, Natan Sharansky's definition of when anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Again, there are times it's not. I would argue that most often, most virulent anti-Zionists are anti-Semites. And so he offers these three concepts, which will flash on the board. This is the formula which he calls the 3 Ds. And the 3 Ds are delegitimization, double standard, and demonization. What does delegitimization mean? The claim that Jews have no right to a homeland. I believe that Natan is absolutely right. The claim that it's Palestine from the river to the sea, that Israel has no right to exist, that years after the Shoah, where we had no place to go, that we have no safe haven, that we're not given the opportunity to proactively develop a society which can be a light to ourselves and the world. Delegitimization of our rights to the homeland, that's anti-Semitism. What's double standard? Judging Israel by a higher standard of morality. Now, we as Jews can do so for ourselves. as ourselves, we could say we demand a higher level of ethical behavior. But anti-Semitism says others cannot do so. And of course, we could see this in the United Nations. That's the glaring example of the double standard, where Israel is over and over singled out by such paragon nations of human rights as North Korea, Cuba, and Iran, and China. As my children would say, give me a break. Demonization. That is when one demonizes Israel with signs that we're seeing all over the country and on campuses declaring Zionism is racism. Zionism is terrorism. Such declarations, when one says Zionism is racism, one is speaking about millions of Jews living in Israel, including my children. They're speaking about many millions more in the diaspora who passionately express the dream of Zion every day across the denominations when we pray. We say it 3 times a day. In other denominations, once a day, or on Shabbat. It's all there. No one cuts it out. May we return to Zion. At weddings, when we break the glass to remember Jerusalem and we recite the blessing, Baruch Ato Hashem, Misameach Tzion Bivaneho, we turn to bride and groom. May you, our children, bride and groom, be joyous in Zion. And at Shiva, what is our final greeting to the bereaved? Hamakom Yenachem Etchem Bitoch Sha'or Avelei Tzion B'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Calling Jews by these demonic names makes it very easy. It inspires reprisal acts of anti-Semitism. Now I want to explain something. I want to turn back to the report and share with you where I really think it falls into the abyss. There is a definition of anti-Semitism called the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. That has been adopted all over the world. And the hope is, we knew that this American strategy was about ready to be published, that would be the definition. It was the definition. It is included in the report, but the report unfortunately cites another strategy called the Nexus strategy, Nexus, and that strategy gives cover to these iterations of delegitimization, double standard, and demonization. It gives cover to these iterations of anti-Semitism. That's why it's deeply flawed. Let's take a look at a paragraph from the piece I had the great honor to do with my grandson, Eitan. It never would have seen the light of day without Eitan's brilliance. Here's what Eitan writes. Here's what we write. Unfortunately, the strategy, and when we say strategy, we're referring to the US strategy, gives cover to this contemporary iteration of anti-Semitism. The contemporary iteration that we're speaking about is the anti-Zionism, the basics of anti-Zionism. Again, what is it? The 3 Ds: delegitimization, double standard, demonization. It does so by including the fringe nexus definition as a guide for identifying Jewish hatred alongside the globally accepted IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition. While the IHRA equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, that's what it does. It says it straight out. If you are going to be in favor of there being no state of Israel or a double standard or demonization, that's the kind of anti-Zionism that is anti-Semitism. While IHRA equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, Nexus provides several caveats allowing for opposition to the Jewish right to self-determination. Wow, that's quite something. You can go to the Nexus text yourself. You can Google it. It speaks about the possibility of people opposed to there being a Jewish homeland, that is not anti-Semitism, as well as applying double standards to Israel by declaring that disproportionate attention to Israel and treating Israel differently than other countries is not prima facie proof of anti-Semitism. Wow. In fact, they offer a reason. After all, America gives Israel $4 billion. And therefore, there could be disproportionate criticism of Israel. I mean, that opens up a whole can of worms. A whole can of worms. Yes, America may be contributing to Israel, but Israel is contributing mightily to America. It was the front line against the spread of communism during the Cold War era. It is a front line against the spread of terrorism throughout the whole world. The world has learned from Israel how to fight terrorism. Here, the Nexus definition opens the anti-Semitism loopholes that IHRA was intended to close, thereby rendering the endorsement of IHRA entirely meaningless. Those are strong words, but we mean every one of those words. If one quotes IRA and alongside say, there's another definition called Nexus, it undercuts IRA. IRA says that there are foundational Zionist ideas that if you are anti those ideas, you are anti-Semitic. And Nexus pulls in the opposite direction. I have no doubt that within the White House, there were voices that wanted Nexus on paper because they wanted to expand the stakeholders to include people who would only become involved if Nexus would be an equal type of definition of anti-Semitism. Now, the strategy, while not mentioning the word Zionism, lays out the dangers that pro-Israel Jews face on campus. The word Israel is mentioned 10 times. By the way, the Holocaust is mentioned 70 times. The museum is mentioned another 10 times. It does in 2 areas, a paragraph apiece, maybe 3 areas. It mentions that Jews pro-Israel on campus have been subjected to attacks, but it offers no plan to respond educationally to this phenomena. It mentions over and over the need for Holocaust education, but fails to even suggest any program or curriculum that teaches the meaning of Zionism going back to biblical times, or how the state of Israel is profoundly tied to the Jewish people. You have to understand Zionism is going back thousands of years. It was not something that came on the scene post the Shoah. Herzl in 1896 at the First Zionist Congress, he didn't invent the Zionist idea. It goes all the way back. And just as educational programs are needed for those who distort the Holocaust, educational programs are needed in schools all over. And America has the money to do so. It's giving money for Holocaust education. It should be giving money to the basics of Zionist education. The basics. Certainly, the inclusion of an organization called CAIR, C-A-I-R, the Council on American Islamic Relations, as a stakeholder, and it was prominently mentioned as a stakeholder in the summary report, impedes the chances of such programs being implemented. Just some PowerPoints. CAIR's founders were tied to Hamas. Its leaders today routinely promote anti-Semitic conspiracies. Leaders on the West Coast describe Zionist synagogues as the enemy. Or they write, quote, "No person with a conscience can be a Zionist." Hating anti-Semites like Linda Sarsour is invited to be a keynote speaker for CAIR, giving her awards to boot. You're not going to be able to deal with the anti-Semitism of the present as long as you have on board organizations like the Council on American Islamic Relations. Think anti-Semitism. Let's think about anti-Semitism for a moment. Think about anti-Semitism today. Instinctively, what do we think about? We think about Israel and Zionism, and we think about the Hasidic community, attacked over and over again. Most of the attackers not seeing one day in prison. One would imagine, therefore, that the strategy would focus on Zionism, Israel. It doesn't. Or one would imagine that it would focus on the Hasidic community. Not so. There's only two small paragraphs at 60 pages, one of the two in an appendix that talks about the Hasidic community and how, because Jews are seen as Jews with their Hasidic garbs, with their Haredi garbs, are attacked. It's presented in such a way that such attacks is kind of a postscript, like an add-on. Well, that's too little, too late. And so let's take a look at the last paragraphs of the piece that we did for Tablet magazine. Here's what we wrote, and then we'll open this up for your questions. In light, if we can highlight it, Shuli, thank you so much. In light of the strategy's failures, in the beginning, we opened the piece by saying that there's a Hebrew idea of the ha'ikar chaser min sefer, which roughly translates, the essential point is missing from the argument, or to use a more popular vernacular, the emperor has no clothes. That's what our critique is. This report basically deals with anti-Semitism of the past. It doesn't speak about anti-Semitism in its full sickness in the present, again, as I mentioned before, Zionism, Israel, and the Hasidic community. And so here's what we put out there, something that we've written about for decades. In light of the strategy failures, our sense is that many in Jewish leadership, even here in the United States, are afraid to confront contemporary anti-Semitism head-on in all its forms, concerned that it draws too much attention to the Jewish community. I saw this in all of our travels throughout Europe. Wherever we went to protest anti-Semitism, locals said to us, "You're making it worse. You are inspiring anti-Semitism." There is something about fighting anti-Semitism which brings too much attention to the self. And so there's a wariness of Jews to stand strong against it. Today we continue speaking out with intensity about the inextricable link between Judaism and Israel touches upon our insecurities and heightened sensitivities about what others may think of us, insecurities and sensitivities that we as diaspora Jews have acquired and absorbed over the years. And so our leadership grasps for the low-hanging fruits. That strategy is 60 pages, I believe, of dealing with the low-hanging fruits, placing emphasis on the aspects of fighting anti-Semitism, like Holocaust revisionism, that involves little risk, but recognizing that anti-Semitism is inextricably bound to anti-Zionism. Speaking out for the Hasidic community requires much more courage. The time has come to raise a voice of moral conscience without fear, recognizing that the more we speak out directly and forthrightly about the new face of anti-Semitism, the more our community is protected rather than rendered vulnerable. The US national strategy to combat anti-Semitism fails lamentably short in upholding this principle. And it was my Abba who taught me to raise a voice against anti-Semitism without fear. It's not what people think. It's not that the more we speak out for Israel, for our people, the more we're rendered vulnerable. The more we speak out, the more we're protected. And may my father's soul know rest and peace, and may his legacy and teachings continue forever and ever.